Hello everyone, and welcome back to JAS Reviews. My name is James, and on this channel I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video, and subscribe to my channel to see more content like that. And today I am bringing you another episode of Quick Album Reviews. I have been catching up on a lot of albums over the past couple of months, so the release dates here are going to be a little bit all over the place. Some will be as recent as March, and some will be as early as February, maybe even a January release or two in here. But nevertheless, I did want to talk about all these albums for varying reasons, so let's not waste any more time and get started with the first album I will be discussing. So first on the list is one of my most anticipated albums of 2025, Sam Fender with his third album, People Watching. Sam Fender is one of my favorite new artists working, and this time new rock artists, although I'm not sure you can necessarily call him new now, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, he still is pretty fresh to the scene, and I really loved both of his previous two albums. Of course, I was excited for this new album, and I mean, the first two singles really impressed me. I loved the lead, People Watching, one of his most upbeat to date, and one of his most empathetic too, in talking about how he is seeing the struggles of people living each and every day. And it's also a love letter to a woman who took care of him and has recently passed away. So it's a very powerful song in that regard, and the music video is excellent too. And then Wild Long Lie might be one of Sam Fender's best songs ever, just talking about the drug addiction problems that are all too apparent in his small town. So with all that being said, I mean, wow, this album is incredible. I was expecting it to be great because I don't expect anything less out of Sam Fender, but it's more than just great. It is an absolute masterpiece, just an incredible work of art, and it's going to be hard to beat this one out for my favorite album this year. I'm just going to go ahead, come right out of the gate and say that because I love pretty much every moment on this album. People Watching is the perfect lead single because it is about Sam Fender trying to have an empathetic perspective into other people's lives. This album isn't necessarily about him as much as it is about people in his town, in his country, who are struggling. Besides People Watching and Wild Long Lie, which are both easy highlights of the album, there are some other great moments on here as well. Nostalgia's Lie is an excellent song with a message you've probably heard before about the fact that we look on the past with a nostalgic lens, but that doesn't necessarily mean the past is better than the present. In fact, often it is the opposite case and we're just putting on rose-colored glasses. But I think the way that Sam presents it in the song is well done, and it doesn't feel particularly cliche to me either. I also think that Crumbling Empire is a wonderful ballad on the album. I think it does an interesting analysis on the state of Britain, especially in the post-Brexit era. And you can tell that Sam has a lot to say here. I have always thought that Sam does well with his political songs, but one of the bigger problems I had on his previous albums was that he was never really super specific on the issues, whereas on this one he very much so is, and he's honing in very intimately on the struggles of the working class. And he also, in this song, I think highlights one of the main thematic arcs of the album, the fact that he realizes his own privilege in the midst of talking about this. There are plenty of other great highlights on here as well. I think that Arm's Length is a very fun song, definitely the most poppy that Sam has ever gotten, but it really works as a very fun love song, and it's just super upbeat and so much fun. And you can tell Sam's passion in talking about this relationship that he's in. It feels very euphoric in that regard. And then there's Rain Man, which I might have to say is Sam's best song to date. This song is just incredible, and it sees Sam talking about the darkest parts of himself and the darkest parts of the world that he's living in, and how they sort of two of them coexist together, and all he wants is everything to be reined in and for things to be better than they are. The song is pretty heart-wrenching in that regard, and Sam's vocals are just so passionate and beautiful. And the last minute and a half of this song is just mind-blowingly beautiful. It is magical what happens. I love that we're getting great rock like this, and Sam Fender is bringing that genre to the forefront when so much of it is radio rock now. TV Dinner is a very interesting turn for Sam Fender, a much darker and more foreboding track on the album. And it almost reminds me of Muse, and would actually make me want to see Sam make a Muse-inspired album because his voice sounds perfect for that type of genre. And the album ending on Remember My Name feels very fitting as a dedication to the love of Sam Fender's grandparents. With all that being said, yeah, this album is a masterpiece. I mean, it is easily my favorite album that Sam Fender has come out with, and he's come out with 2 great albums, but this one is just on another level for him and shows him just evolving his artistic identity in an incredible way, and I don't have a single problem with it. So with that being said, this is going to be my first album in a couple of years that I am giving a perfect 5 out of 5 stars, and I think it is deserving of it. Superb album, please check it out if you haven't yet. Next up, we're moving into the world of metalcore with Architect's newest release, The Sky, the Earth, and All Between. Now, I'll admit that I was pretty mixed on Architect's last album, The Symptoms of a Broken Spirit. In fact, I think I may have been a little bit too generous to that album, because if anything, it has shrunk on me over the past couple of years. It's just a real shame. I feel like Architects didn't really know what to do after the backlash they received with their album before it, which was entitled For Those That Wish to Exist. And that is an album that I still feel is incredibly overhated. In fact, I love it. It's one of my top 3 Architects albums, I would say, or at least top 4. But nevertheless, it seemed like they were at a loss as to what to do. And so it was very frustrating to me when the lead single for this album, Seeing Red, came out, which if you have been following my channel for a couple years now, you will know was one of my least favorite songs of the year it came out. I just hate the subject matter of it, talking about the idea of criticism doesn't matter and they don't really care what their fans think. And besides that, the only single I listened to on this album was Black Hole. And this is another one where I felt a little conflicted on it. I did like that Architects was going heavier again, but just because a song is heavy doesn't mean it was good. And I feel like this song was, I don't know how to describe it. It felt a little plastic, I guess you could say, and I think that had to do with how heavily programmed the drums were, and even the guitars felt a little weak in places. It left me a little worried with where Architects was going to go with this new album. And yeah, I think overall this album is a bit of a mixed bag. It is better than the classic Symptoms of a Broken Spirit, but that is not saying much because that album, I would say, is not very good at all at this point. And this album, I don't know, it feels like Architects are a bit in identity crisis here. I felt like they were much more confident on For Those That Wish to Exist. I still contend that that album, even though it had some very different moments, it still felt distinctly like their identity. Whereas this album, besides Sam's recognizable voice, if you told me it was an Architects album, I wouldn't necessarily believe you. It just sounds very different for them. One of the most primary examples of this is Everything Ends, which just feels like a Bring Me the Horizon B-side. It's not necessarily a terrible song, it's competently made radio rock, but it's not necessarily doing anything to impress me either. Instead of Architects making the sound and influencing the sound, and they have influenced so many metalcore bands in the past, it feels like they're taking influences from other bands and making hollow versions of that, which, I don't know, it just feels like the opposite of what Architects should do, considering that they have been a very influential band in the scene in the past. And there are definitely some good songs on here, a couple that I would consider great. I think the opener, Elegy, is a nice epic way to begin the album, and this one feels like it would be the closest to fitting on For Those That Wish to Exist, which is why I like it. Brain Dead is a really cool pop-punk version of, or punk rock even, version of Architects that I was not expecting at all. I did not expect them to pursue this sound, but it works well for them. And this song is incredibly energetic and fun. I also love the feature from House of Protection. They offer a really unique perspective on this song that I really enjoyed. And Evil Eyes is probably my favorite on the album, just for how intriguing its atmosphere is. There are some other okay-ish songs here that I did enjoy. For example, I think that Broken Mirror is a pretty good ballad. I did like what it was going for. And Whiplash, even though it is pretty predictable, I will say, does have a fun chorus, and I do like the breakdown in it. Even though it definitely feels like your typical Octane Core ready song, it's not the worst thing you'll hear in that genre. A lot of this album just comes across as mainly okay to me more than anything else, and there are definitely some other moments that don't work for me on here. I think the closer, Chandelier, does not really work for me. Sam's vocals sound very processed in the song, And because of that, the emotion doesn't really translate well at all. I'm not sure why they went this route. I also think that Curse is not a particularly interesting lead single. It just comes and goes without leaving much of an impression. And like I said, I'm very conflicted on Black Hole. I don't think it's a terrible song, but there are lots of things about it that I just don't care for. So with all that being said, this adds up to a very middle of the road album. I'll say it's ever so slightly above average, but just only a little bit. I do still consider this album to be a bit disappointing. I know Architects can do better than this, and I just wish that they felt like they didn't have something to prove with trying to be heavier, because I don't think they have to do that. And for those that wish to exist, prove that, in my opinion. But this is what the fans wanted, so I suppose they gave it to them. But it doesn't necessarily work for me in every way, shape, and form on this album. Light 3 out of 5 stars on this album. And even with that, I think I'm being a little bit generous here. Next up is a much anticipated follow-up to Eternal Blue by Spiritbox entitled Tsunami Sea. I've been very much so looking forward to this album, but thankfully Spiritbox hasn't really left the conversation for a while now. I think it was actually a pretty smart decision for them to be releasing EPs over the past couple of years to keep people in the consciousness, especially while they're at their peak of their popularity. And I did like both of their EPs. I thought both of them were really good, especially the most recent one, which had what is maybe my favorite Spiritbox song, Jaded, and one that got deservedly nominated for a Grammy. I absolutely love that song. So I was very excited to see Spiritbox starting to promote their new album cycle. And their singles for it were pretty good. I didn't really love Soft Spine as much as some of Spiritbox's other lead singles, but it was very fun, and it definitely is one that sticks in your head. But then Perfect Soul came out, and I absolutely loved that song. If I could go back, that song would probably end up being on my favorite songs of 2024, but because it is on a 2025 album, it is very much so eligible for that list, that top 50 songs list at the end of this year. The song is just that good. Overall, Tsunami Sea is a really good sequel to Eternal Blue, and it feels like a proper sequel in many ways. It's capturing a lot of the same themes of drifting out and not being sure who you are, and struggles with mental health, a lot of things like that. But it also sees Courtney tackling her struggles with fame and maybe losing some parts of herself in the result. The album musically is also pretty great. I think it begins off on an excellent note with Fata Morgana, which is just truly epic and has a very evil sounding chorus. I love Courtney's voice in the chorus. It's beautiful yet haunting, and it really brings you into the much darker vibe that this album is going to give, whereas Eternal Blue was more upbeat and did have definitely more positive areas in it. This one is much more foreboding and eerie. Black Rainbow is an absolutely wild song from Spiritbox, which with some insane guitar work that I loved. And I mean, Courtney's screams are just massive on this one. But really the best song of the first part of the album, and maybe the best song on the album in general, is Perfect Soul. This one has just continued to impress me. I liked it when I heard it last year. I like it even more in context of the album, and heck, it could become one of my favorite Spiritbox songs. The chorus is irresistible, and this one sees Courtney talking about her struggles with losing herself as she becomes a bigger celebrity. I love the harmonies between her and her husband in the chorus. They are just beautiful, and I would love to hear more from him. I think that Keep Sweet is a pretty interesting song too. Definitely a bit more of a punk vibe here, but I particularly love the guitar solo in this one. And then we get another great song on the album in A Haven with Two Faces, which sees the band talking about their hometown in more symbolic and beautiful ethereal ways. It's just an excellent song which sees Spiritbox returning back to their more progressive roots, which is something that I've definitely been missing from them. No Loss, No Love feels like the spiritual successor to Holy Roller, and I think intentionally so. This song is ugly and evil sounding, and I like the experimentation that's done on it too, with the more trap infused / dubstep infused pre-choruses that lead into the just punishing chorus that works so well. And then Crystal Roses is another surprising highlight for me. I found this one to be super surprising in what it was doing. And I don't know, I really liked the EDM inspired stuff that it was going for. And the album ends pretty well with Deep End, just a sort of simple, beautiful song, bringing back the water metaphors and water symbolism to the forefront. And Courtney just sounds very confident on it. As you can tell, I don't really have that many big problems with this album. I think the only song that I'm really not too big on is Ride the Wave. This one is just a little strange in the chorus. I didn't really vibe with the chorus that much. That might be a controversial opinion, because I am seeing this one be a fan favorite, but this one doesn't work for me quite as much. And I do think the title track, Tsunami Sea, might be a little too similar to Eternal Blue. I get that it's supposed to be the sister of Eternal Blue, and Courtney LaPlante has said as such. It makes sense, but there are places where it just feels like a little bit of a lesser version of that album, or that song rather. This album does show that Spiritbox can do very well on a follow-up. I think this album is pretty close to Eternal Blue, even if it isn't quite as good, and the strong moments on this are really strong. Perfect Soul is just superb, one of my top 3 Spiritbox songs probably. I think that A Haven with Two Faces is a great return to form for their prog roots. And Fata Morgana and Black Rainbow are simply just 2 excellent opening tracks. This album is great, and I'm just excited to see what Spiritbox continues to do next. One of the best in the metalcore scene right now, and I think they are deserved of their popularity. Strong 4 out of 5 stars for this one. Next up, I'm going to talk about Mayhem by Lady Gaga. It's so strange in this time to think I'm talking about Lady Gaga when in my teenage years I was not a fan of her at all and didn't really care for her as an artist. But thankfully I have become more open-minded and I can definitely see her talent. But with this new album, it does see Lady Gaga returning back to her roots after doing a more pop country album in Joanne, and doing songs with the likes of Tony Bennett, and being in movies like Joker 2, as well as A Star is Born, where she was doing more either traditional Broadway songs or more rock-infused songs. So it is definitely very interesting to see her returning back to her roots, something which she has admitted she was very nervous to do, and a couple of its singles has done very well, in particular Abracadabra, which feels like probably the seminal return to form for Lady Gaga, the seminal return to her classic style. Definitely reminds of songs like Poker Face or Bad Romance, and I admit I really like this song. I think that it could become a little annoying if I listen to it too much, but I've listened to it just enough to really enjoy it. And I mean, even the little stuttered post-chorus of just saying the title over and over again, in the context of this song, it just works really well. It's not like a legendary pop album necessarily, but it is nice to hear pop having fun here and feeling very rejuvenated. I really like just one of the pop veterans still showing that she's able to compete with the best of them and maybe even be better than some of the other pop stars out right now. I think that Disease, I know a lot of people aren't as big on that one, but I do think that's a pretty fun song, and I like how dark it feels, and the little grunts that Lady Gaga makes in the pre-choruses are pretty cool. I think that Perfect Celebrity is a really interesting one, which sees Lady Gaga showing more of her rock influence. Zombie Boy is a lot of just delightful fun, another huge highlight for me. And it's apparently a dedication to another person that Lady Gaga has worked with, and you can feel the love in the song. I can't help but have a great time with it and smile every time I hear it. How Bad Do You Want Me is basically a Taylor Swift song. I've seen everyone say that, and I'm not going to disagree, but I think Lady Gaga does a pretty decent impression of her, and I think it works. I do like the closer, Die With a Smile. I'm not sure that it was necessary to be here. I can see that maybe she only had it down here to inflate streaming numbers, because Die With a Smile continues to be such a big song, even now. But it does still feel oddly fitting in a way. I think that Vanish Into You is a pretty good song as well, and I mean, there's not much to complain about here overall, I would say. I think that Garden of Eden is a little overrated. This one didn't really vibe with me at all, and it just feels like a sort of lesser version of Abracadabra, especially with stuttering out words in the post-chorus like Abracadabra does, but it doesn't work quite as well. I think that Love Drug is maybe a little bit cliched, even though it definitely does have a real catchiness to it. And overall, the second half of the album is definitely weaker than the first. I do think it falters off, especially the run from Don't Call Tonight to The Beast. Don't Call Tonight feels like it's trying to be a sequel to Alejandro, and it's pretty obvious, and I don't think it works as a result, because it feels a little hollow. And then Shadow of a Man and The Beast, just nothing about them in particular sticks with me. But still, this is a good album from Lady Gaga. I think it shows that she can still pursue this style if she wants to, and I would encourage her to move forward with it in the future. I really liked what she did here, and I found it to be a lot of fun. Solid 3.5 out of 5 stars from me. Next up is an album that I don't have a whole lot to say about, and that is Eusexua by FKA Twigs. I mean, my thoughts on this one are pretty simple. It's a really cool and I think pretty innovative pop album. I really liked what it did, but there are definitely parts where it might be a little too weird for my taste. Then there are other parts, on the other hand, where the weirdness does work. For an example, on the song Striptease, as strange as that song is, I think it works as a very sexy song that keeps on building. I think the title track is excellent. I mean, really well done, and I think that Perfect Stranger is also quite good, and maybe my favorite off the album. I really like what that song does, and FKA Twigs' voice is just really unique. I like what she brings to the table here in talking about her sexuality and her feelings about it. It's very interesting. But there are definitely some songs on here that just I can't really find much to say about or are unmemorable. Childlike Things features Northwest and does feel very childish. I will admit it does fit that theme. But I feel like the usage of Japanese language feels a little half-hearted and doesn't really work and feels unnecessary on the song. I think songs like Drums of Death and Sticky are just a little bit too weird for my taste, particularly Drums of Death. I cannot find it in me to really care for that song, but I do think this is a pretty cool pop album, and I think it takes some cool risks. I respect it for that reason, so I'm going to give it a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is an album that I was very much so dreading listening to, and that was the newest from A Day to Remember, Big Ole Album Volume 1. I'm not sure if they're going to release other volumes this year or not, but nevertheless, this is apparently part of a series of albums with the name Big Ole Album. And yeah, after You're Welcome, I wasn't sure if A Day to Remember could bounce back. I did have some small hopes when they released their single Miracle a couple years back that was actually pretty good, but those hopes were quickly dashed when they released Feedback last year, which I consider to just be painfully cringe and one of the worst songs they have made, period. Although maybe not as bad as certain tracks from You're Welcome, it's still quite embarrassing. But I'll be honest, this album sort of surprised me. Now, it's not great by any means, and I think A Day to Remember has done much, much better than this, but this is way better than I could have ever expected. In fact, I like this a little better than their independent effort Bad Vibrations. That doesn't mean there aren't some bad moments on here, we'll talk about them, but there are some genuinely good moments on here. I think what is really keeping this album from being a bit above average for me is that it is actually having a good sense of fun. A Day to Remember isn't taking themselves too seriously here, and the fun doesn't feel forced like it did on You're Welcome, where they were trying to be cutesy, but it came across as cringe. I think this is most apparent in one of the singles, Make It Make Sense, which is a good way to open off the album with big guitar riffs and a pretty fun breakdown, and Jeremy McKinnon's voice feels like old A Day to Remember on this song in many ways, especially in the chorus, which feels immediately nostalgic. I also think that Flowers is one of A Day to Remember's best in recent memory. This one really surprised me, feeling very sincere and well written in talking about Jeremy McKinnon's parents and giving an overall good message of trying to let your loved ones know that you do love them while they're here before it's too late, giving them their flowers, so to speak. The breakdown in the song was very unnecessary. I don't know why they included that here, but other than that, the song is good. I also think Same Team is excellent. In fact, this one might be my favorite on the album. It is a little cheesy, especially when it spells out loyalty with what sounds like a cheerleader sort of team spelling it out, and I think that was intentional. But the song is having such unashamed fun that I can't help but smile along and have a great time with it. I think the closer, Closer Than You Think, is also pretty good. It's not mind-blowing or anything, but it's a nice, sort of inspiring way to end the album, much better than the very terrible closer we got from You're Welcome. I will take it, for sure. While this album is having fun, I do think some of the lyrics come across as repetitive, and sometimes they do feel a little cringe to me. All My Friends is one of the primary examples of this, probably my least favorite on the album outside of Feedback. I found this one to be just a frat boy anthem, and maybe there's a bit of satire in there too, because they're clearly not taking it seriously with having a Grand Theft Auto meme be part of the chorus, but at the same time, it's such an outdated meme that it doesn't really work in the chorus. I also found Bad Blood to be way too repetitive and not fun at all, and I don't know, it just felt like something I've heard dozens of times before. Of course, we have to have another song about a day to remember not caring about the criticism. And while this one isn't as painful as Feedback, I still really just don't care for LeBron at all. It is another one where they just are so clearly salty at people being mad for them for good reasons for the awful album You're Welcome. And it just left me with a bad taste in my mouth in the middle of the album. This album was a definite surprise for me. I found it to be a lot better than I was expecting. There are still some bad moments, and definitely moments that remind me that this is a day to remember under Fueled by Ramen, but it's better than what I would have expected. I do still think that maybe Miracle is the best song on the album outside of Same Team, which is unfortunate because that song came out a couple years ago, but still, this album does have more to commend than to not commend, which I think is a good thing. Solid 3 out of 5 stars for me. And finally, let's talk about the newest from Memphis May Fire, Shapeshifter. I was very impressed with Memphis May Fire's last album, Remade in Misery. It was a huge return to form to them after coming off of what I think were 2 terrible albums. They really revitalized themselves, and while it's definitely a different sound than what they were doing on The Hollow and Challenger, I still did think it was a good evolution for them, especially in the modern era. And they were able to do accessible metalcore without making it feel cliched or overdone. A lot of that having to do with Kellen McGregor's well-written lyrics and Matty Mullen's undeniable vocal talent. With this album, the lead single Chaotic indicated that they would be going in a slightly even more accessible direction this time around, maybe even a little bit more radio-friendly, maybe even friendly enough for Octane Core, which I know some people won't like, but Memphis May Fire, I think they do Octane Core on this album pretty well. That is what this album feels like, but it's less generic than you might expect compared to other bands in that scene. Now, this album isn't perfect, and I think its genericism can be its detriment in certain places, but in other places, it does make for a very catchy and fun album. I don't mind Chaotic at all. I think it's a pretty fun song, and while the stuttering of the syllables, once again, is something that can come across a little irritating, I think it's fine enough in this song, and the song doesn't overstay its welcome either, which is good. I think Infection is such a good track, one of my favorites on the album for sure. I love the just industrial guitar work in the song, especially after the first chorus. It is excellent sounding. And Matty's vocals really work well on this song. He feels very passionate here. Paralyzed was one of the other lead singles for the album, and I do like this one better than Chaotic. This one definitely feels as close as you can get to Memphis May Fire's older sound, and I think a lot of fans are liking it for that reason, and for good reason as well. But my favorite on the album actually comes in the softest song on the album. Memphis May Fire is not usually a band where I prefer their ballads. I do tend to prefer their heavier songs, but on this album, I do think their ballad works the best. The Other Side is just beautiful. It's a very inspiring song about fighting for what you believe in and fighting for who you love and coming out better on the other side of all that. I really just loved Matty's passion in the chorus. It is very euphoric feeling, and I especially love the last iteration of it in the final chorus. In fact, the run from Necessary Evil to Shapeshifter is probably the best run the album has. Necessary Evil is another just excellent banger, and I mean, the screams are nasty on this one. And then Shapeshifter is easily the heaviest on the album with a screamed chorus that works well and becomes very catchy very quickly. And the album ends fine enough on Love is War. It's not the most interesting ending, and I do think I like the ending of Remade in Misery a little better, but it is cool to see the album end on a more upbeat note. There are a couple of negative moments on this album that I don't love. I'm not going to say there's anything I outright despise here. I do think that Overdose feels like a lesser version of Infection, and it feels like they're saying the same thing. It just Overdose is doing it in a less interesting way. I think that Hell is Empty is a little bit too over the top, and I don't love how they use the electronics here. And Maddie's vocals, I don't know why they do this, but they feel a little processed. And Verses as a build-up feels just a little unnecessary. I also do wish the album was a little bit longer. It feels like it comes and goes, and it's a nice dose of energy while you're listening to it, and it does warrant repeat listens because of how catchy the songs are. But I wish there had been a little bit more substance to it, because it doesn't feel as fulfilling as Remade in Misery does, in my opinion. But for what it is, this album is a good time. I think Memphis Mayfire shows that they know how to have fun, and they know how to evolve their sound, and they're able to make it radio-friendly without making it feel overly cliched. Even if there are moments here that do feel generic, they are more overshadowed by the moments that I do genuinely enjoy. And sometimes a little bit generic can be okay, and in this album, I think that is more often the case than not. Solid 3.5 out of 5 stars for this one. And with that, we end this episode of Quick Album Reviews. What were your thoughts on any of the albums I discussed? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, my name is James, and I do reviews of both music and movies, along with the occasional commentary piece, so if any of that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like on this video and subscribe to see more content like that. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.